Hello and welcome to the fifth live stream of the Eric Olin Wright's Understanding Class Reading Group series. Today we have a small panel, not a Palin, a small Sarah Palin. We're expecting Derek later on to drop in, so we decided that we would just kick it off while we were there. You just heard the main person themselves. Tiberius, how's it going over there?
It's a beautiful day. Not gonna lie, I would like to be outside right now.
What are you saying?
I'm saying that I am giving up my beautiful day to be here with you guys. So y'all better appreciate it.
Like this is fucking. This is California, right? It's a good day every day in California. You've got some nerve coming on here talking about the weather. Now then, all the way from somewhere in Canada is the main man himself. That's two. I'm using the word main quite a lot today. Is Kyle. Kyle, how's it going?
Yeah, different gender identity. We can both be main. I think, I mean, it's been really weird here in terms of weather. Like, we had more or less summer, and then it went into rainstorms. So we were kind of in like spring, fall, and then it started having blizzards. So then we were into winter. Yesterday it was kind of spring and sunny, and today it's completely overcast and quite cold. So, and then we're going to have rain again the next 2 days. So it's classic Calgary spring weather. But one interesting thing that's happened here, which I should highlight because it's just so unusual for Calgary, is there was a massive car protest in favor of Palestine that happened recently here. I think it was yesterday, maybe. The organizers said that 200 cars were going to show up, but then 1,000 showed up. So just like bumper to bumper, 1,000 cars with like pro-Palestinian slogans painted on their backs. And yeah, that's pretty wild for Calgary. So I was pretty happy to see that. Something that, protest in Calgary that's not like about just, turning stopping vaccinations, protesting masks, or protesting abortions. So yeah, super cool.
That is very sweet. Can you see on the screen there? This was in Washington Square Park, or is Washington Square Park in downtown Manhattan? Fucking Palestinians doing figure of eights in their car.
That's so sick. I hope they were doing that in Calgary. I saw like somebody who had like a Golf GTI like hot hatch with like Free Palestine painted in like spray paint on the back. It's pretty cool. I should have gone. But everybody over 200 got tickets though, so that sucks.
Seriously, they got ticketed for just driving?
Well, because the organizers said there were going to be 200 cars, and then 1,000 showed up. So like the police were like, "Oh, okay, we're going to ticket everybody over 200."
Scumbags.
Yeah, fuck the police.
Fuck the police.
Like that.
Cops do be like that. I like that's like proper Hiberno English grammar there. Cops do be like that. I think that's where that comes from, because there's an extra present tense in Irish that can't be expressed in English only by saying do be. There you go. Grammatical tip for today.
Yeah, the habitual be also shows up in African American vernacular.
You wonder, is it like from Irish influence, or is it from like African languages that have that same tense? But as a kid around me, like everybody said it all the time. But it got kicked out of me when I went to Dublin. Right. It's definitely a working class affect in Ireland. What did you call it? What tense is it?
It's the habituative tense, I believe.
Yeah.
Something like that.
It does be called the habitual tense. Okay. Today we are here. We're going to start on chapter 3. This is quite a large chapter. We'll see how we get on today. We'll probably get at least halfway through it. This is the meta-theoretical foundations of Charles Tilly durable equality. With the general gist of this book is kind of, Eric Olin Wright kind of looking at all of these kind of a lot of normie socialism, sociology, normie socialism, sociology from a kind of a Marxist perspective and seeing what kind of holds up. So today we're going to have a look at this dude, Charles Tilly. Okay, so I'll take the first slide here and we'll talk a little bit about this chapter. Okay. So, like, one of the strengths is for, which is kind of probably unusual for sociology. I'm not a sociology expert, but it seems like it stuck out to me, is that one of its strengths is that it might be wrong. That, like, you can actually test some of the, empirically, some of the predictions. And it makes the case that beliefs, attitudes, and culture may contribute to stabilizing inequality, but they are of less causal importance in explaining inequality than the organizational structures in which inequality becomes embedded. So this, like, Tilly is kind of like making like a Marx type argument. He does not pull his punches in advancing bold and provocative claims. It maps out a positive research agenda, and basic underlying structure of his argument brings him close to the core logic of classical Marxism. Anybody have any comments on that as a kind of a general summary of what we're going to be jumping into?
Yeah, so this, I think under the influence of structuralism, at least in America, Canada, Tilly's thesis kind of goes against the majority view of what most people believe about inequality right now, where, like, structuralism kind of muddies the waters here a bit, in the sense that, like, yeah, you can talk about, like, structural oppression and attribute that to organizational structures, but for a lot of people, there's, like, privilege checking and that kind of stuff that Tilly would say is of actually quite little importance in creating inequality. So it's a controversial point of view.
Tilly's is controversial.
I would say so, yes. If you advance these arguments to most people on the left in Canada, I think they would find them offensive, because there is, like, a kind of slippage into something like what Tilly's describing with that influence of structuralism. Like, in terms of saying, oh yeah, like, these organizations are structured in such a way that they oppress people and reproduce inequality. But I think for a lot of people, it's more down to, are you woke enough?
Radlib.
Say, what do you think? Yeah.
Yeah,
there's a kind of slippage between the structuralist position and the Radlib position for most people on the left in Canada and the US, I would say.
Oh yeah, I would definitely say the US too. There's I think a slippage is a good way to describe it, because you see a lot of mostly liberal Radlib kind of people talk about institutions and structures of racism. But really what they mean is that a lot of people in aggregate hold racist beliefs, basically. Like, they're using the structuralist language to describe, like, very individualistic modes of thinking.
Yeah. Aggregations of individuals versus actual structures.
Right.
Yeah, it tends to be like a structural description of the problem the general problem and then prescribing individualistic solutions to those structural problems. I think was maybe one way you could describe it.
Yes, the paper straw solution to global warming. Okay, let's move it along. Okay, so here's the argument. Okay, the Explanandam. I had to look that up. Did anybody else here know what Explanandam was? I kind of knew what it was, but I still had to look it up to make sure.
I figured he made it up until I looked it up, and I'm like, oh, I guess thing.
Kyle knew it, I bet.
Yeah, I think when I read it, I understood what it meant.
Yeah, same here, but I still had to look it up. You know, that's what I say. Yeah, because it's quite close to the word explained, isn't it? Okay, now, joke. Okay, so what's to be explained? Okay, so this is what the utility is trying to explain with his thesis: is durable inequalities that last from one social interaction to the next, that persist over whole careers, lifetimes, and organizational histories. These durable inequalities almost always are built around categorical distinctions among people rather than around gradient attributes of individuals. Okay, so more about, say, being, say, black or being a prole than it is about, like, whether you're smart or, like, handsome or whatever, you as an individual. Thirdly, large inequalities and advantages among human beings correspond mainly to categorical differences, such as black, white, male, female, citizen, foreigner, Muslim or Jew. No, that's pretty fitting weak for that one, rather than to individual differences in attributes, propensities, or performances. Right, we just had Derek added. Let's add Derek here now. Derek, how's it going? You're unmuted. I unmuted Derek.
All right,
hello, Derek.
I'm fine.
Yeah. Sorry, Derek. We just started 5 minutes ago, so we haven't missed anything. Only the first slide. So we're just getting into the argument of just talking about what Tilly's argument is. Yeah. So anybody have any comments on this slide on his general argument? It's kind of pretty it's kind of pretty up our street here. This kind of class/category kind of understanding of inequality. Anybody have any thoughts on, like, the definition as how it would last from one social interaction to another, or any of that stuff?
I mean, I think the way that Tilly describes the causality of these categories reproducing inequality more or less tracks with what I've read in history about the origins of some of these categories and why they became oppressive distinctions. So I found this to be fairly convincing. It's certainly not an argument that denies the importance of mental representations of the world. And I think the way he describes that, you basically, like, if you think about the origins of the system of racism, it tracks pretty closely with what Tilly describes as the kind of, like, incentives and causal functions that reproduce these inequalities.
Anybody else have anything to say? This, sorry, I was just eating a bit of noodle. Yeah, so it's like I find it kind of. I found when I was writing up these slides, like these are direct quotes from the book, the description here of, like, citizen, foreigner, male, female, black, white. But the Muslim Jew one really stood out to me. I kind of felt a bit dodgy writing that distinction at the time, but it's like it's extremely apt given the week that we've just gone through. Yeah.
Yeah, but like Kyle said, it at least has the strength of tracking empirically with the patterns of oppressive categories like throughout history.
Yeah, like, for example, the creation of a like tabulated race system in the Caribbean in order to deal with certain labor and immigration issues that the authorities had. It's like literally they were creating these categories in order to perform the kinds of defensive inequality maintenance that Tilly describes.
Yeah, and I mean, what's interesting, they're binary categories, but they're also somewhat, well, with the exception of male-female, they're actually somewhat capricious. If you know anything about like the Spanish Empire, you could get a writ of blood, for example, which would legally put you in a different racial caste. So you could actually literally become white without having, like legally in a way, unlike the way it happens in the Anglo colonies where it was social and passing. But what's interesting about this is what's a little bit hard to disaggregate in Tilly is when are these like post hoc categorizations to maintain say power differentials, and when are they kind of a second order form of class is a little harder to say depending on which one you're looking at, right?
Yeah, like citizen, foreigner, like that could be, not really much of a thing in given, under certain circumstances.
Right.
Yeah.
And with the pathway of the development of like nations and the nation state, it often gets subsumed into other usually racialized categories. Like if you're non-white in the United States, people often will treat you as something of a foreigner, even if you were born here. Like, for example, my name comes from India, and I have on many occasions told someone my name, and they're like, "Oh, where are you from?" And I'll be like, "Oh, I'm from California." And they'll be like, "No, where are you actually from?" Because, that sort of like marks you as someone who is not, who doesn't really belong in a sense to that kind of category of like the nation state, the inside versus outside that nation state.
Well, that's an interesting problem in the whole like citizen versus foreigner in a quasi-racialized nation state. I mean, even like because when you think about citizenship in the Roman Empire, that's not citizenship to a nation state; that's citizenship to an empire. And yet, even if you read stuff from the late Roman Empire, and these are people without any strong conception of what we would call race, every now and then you'll still hear people grumbling about citizens looking Germanic. So,
yeah. And I think it's because these categories are quite fluid.
Except for the Germans. Except for the Germans.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing I would say is that the male-female distinction is also becoming increasingly capricious. I know people who have transitioned and basically experienced a radically different treatment according to their categorization. So yeah, it's
yeah. Have you read some of the different sociological takes on what happens in both transitionings, because it can be shocking in both ways. So
yeah, I haven't read the sociology. I've just talked to people with firsthand experience.
Yeah, like the female to male transition have incredibly high suicide rates, which is kind of weird. Well, not weird, but it's kind of depressing. Yeah, I only know trans people online. Like, I don't know any in my real life, non-online, and nearly everybody like all these communist people, they're all trans. It's kind of bizarre. I'm just like this cis weirdo who's befriended all these commies. What's wrong with me?
So
That just means you're an egg and haven't figured it out yet.
What's an egg?
You'll get there.
I work with young people, so I do deal with a lot more people who are experimenting with that. Although I don't deal with a lot of people who've transitioned until they're, and except in communist circles or in the city. I think though the male female is interesting because I'm going to say something somewhat controversial. There's always been fluidity in that one, but you could semi-attach it to biological physical difference in a way you kind of can't now for frankly both social and technological reasons. 100 years ago there was no way to transition, so it's interesting how these social categories and these legal categories also are in like pretty big feedback loops with changes in technology and social class, right? Like that's pretty, and I think the male female non-binary etc is where that's the most obvious if people like really think about it, because we can now do things we could not do before.
Derek, who was which was the Pope that was a woman? There was a Pope that was a woman, wasn't there?
Pope Joan, although they have never proven Pope Joan actually existed, and the way that they, according to the legend of Pope Joan, the way they found out is when Pope Joan died, they went to treat the body, and well,
there you go, lads. Now, let's move. We'll move on to the next one. The meta-theoretical foundations. Okay, so Tilley's approach is built upon two meta-theoretical foundations. One, anti-individualism, and two, combinatory structuralism. Okay, that's quite a mouthful. Who wants to... okay, let me read these bits. Explanations of inequality must be at their core social, relational. To the extent that individual attributes explain inequalities, they are explanatory by virtue of the nature of the social relations within which those individual attributes operate. Analyses he analyzes the basic elementary forms with more complex structural configurations, analyzes specific forms of combinations of these elementary forms, and the equivalent. So, and these forms are the equivalent of the periodic table of elements in chemistry. Okay, what do people think of combinatory structuralism then?
So basically, I'm trying to figure out how this is different from basic intersectional theory. Except that it comes from a slightly different purpose.
Starting point.
Starting point, because intersectionality under Crenshaw starts actually as a case of legal analysis and figuring out like when strict versus medium scrutiny are applied in the U.S. systems of discriminatory law, and if you don't, there's different forms of scrutiny. With this, so explanations of inequality must be at their core social relational. We all agree with that, because like inequality in systems that are legal have to do with access. If this is an oppression system that's formalized into the law in some way, that and it also has non-legal or social stigmas, so that's relational, right? You can't have a non-relational social structure. To the extent that individual attributes explain inequalities, they are explanatory by virtue of the nature of the social relations with it. So let's say that, I guess this is saying that even if there are, say, physical differences between categories of people, like sexual dimorphism between the various sexes, the inequalities are actually still relational because there's no value behind like small.
Well, they're
differences in
situated
size.
in their relation, isn't that it?
Right. They're situated in their relation. So this is only an inequality in a way that puts one above another because of the relationship we've established and because how we're using that. Right. So, okay. Analyzes basic elementary form. The more complex structural configurations are specific forms of these elementary forms. This is where I don't know what the hell we're talking about. Kyle or Tiberius, can you explain this to me?
Yeah, I mean it's more sort of like evolutionary confluence with intersectional theory. Basically, you're taking various forms of recognized differences and then combining them together to see where you fit within the hierarchy, basically. Like, that's my reading of it, at least.
So it's a very complicated hierarchy matrix, basically. And the simple forms are like the ones that we can immediately look at. But then, like, if I am a cis height West Indian poor foreigner, that is going to put me in a different point in the hierarchy matrix than, say, a trans white bourgeois Caitlyn Jenner figure.
Yeah.
Like
Right.
so there might still be multiple inequalities in the greater person in that hierarchy, but in the matrix of things. But
So,
what's this though about I think we might be making this more like intersectional theory though, because the basic elementary forms with the more complex structural configurations, what exactly is that? What do you think,
So
Tom?
I think like he's making the case like that. It's I feel like this point, if I understood it correctly, is kind of not really a Marxist point, as in like the kind of core stuff that comes out in from Marx is like, you know, your relationship to the production, also your gender. So like, you know, they're the kind of, that's the initial what does it Engels say or Marx say?
I think we're getting a little tripped up here. So I'll just give you a quick rundown of what's in the book here. So the elementary forms are off of two menus. So one is a menu of types of social relations, and the second is a menu of inequality generating mechanisms. So you have chain, hierarchy, triad, organization, and categorical pair are types of social relations. And then you have exploitation, opportunity hoarding, emulation, and adaptation as the causal mechanisms.
Okay, yeah. Sorry, that was the next the next slide. Yeah, sorry.
So the elementary types are very formal. They're not like really empirical types. They're just like things you could put on a graph, basically.
Yeah, like one thing sorry, because it's about a week or two since I've done the slides, so I've kind of forgot. Like these type of social relations here that are not actually defined in the book. So does anybody know how we can what these individual ones are?
This is like stuff that you would find in social network analysis. So you have chain, which is like A to B to C, right? Then you have hierarchy, where you have, as you can imagine, like a point at the top and points at the bottom that connect up to it. You have a triad, which is literally just a triangle. Or organization, it says here, of these five elementary forms of social relation, the most pivotal for the study of durable inequality, Tilly argues, is organization.
I presume
so. I think what he means by organization is a complex combination of the first three. Would be an organization. And then a categorical pair would just be like the pairs that he outlined above, as in like male, female, rich, poor, citizen, foreigner. So that would apply like across entire social maps. It'd be a very general thing.
So he's basically making a Marxist point, then the most important is the organizational structure, which is, you know, I think that's quite a Marxist point, as opposed to the categorical pair.
Right.
Yeah, I think so.
But would the categorical pair be how we actually tend to conceptualize this, as opposed to seeing it within its framework in the larger organization? Like, this is where having read Wright but not Tilly is not helpful. So I've read the Wright section now multiple times, but I've never read what Wright is writing about. So
yeah, I mean, categorical pair would be like bourgeois proletarian, right?
Right.
So it's pretty fundamental to Marxist analysis. I think what he's saying, though, is if you want to look at the causal mechanisms, you need to look at the organizations first and foremost, because he's interested in a sociology of this subject. So I guess that's where he goes to. I just wanted to say one other thing is, like, if you look at like a broad social network, you would probably see like a bifurcation of groups according to categorical pairs, even as they're connected across each other in organizations.
Could you not also say, like, just from a kind of a math point, that like you can represent like the distinction between what's a categorical pair and an organization is kind of fluid. Like, if you were to pick proles versus like bourgeois, I know like that there's organs that map on to those categorical pairs pretty well. That it's kind of a
I think what's going on there is that you would have organizations and you would see a degree of clustering between amid categorical pairs that you would see as significant. But mathematically speaking, I don't think that there's a strict form that you could attribute to categorical pair.
Yeah. Okay.
It would be more of a statistical thing.
Yeah. So I guess the thing that was kind of tripping me up when I was reading this, and the reason why I brought up that, it seemed to me like it was something of ending up at the same place as intersectional theory, but just coming from a different theoretical foundation, is that it seems like I read this as being the categorical pairs form the sort of like basis of the distinctions, essentially, like the ways in which you look at like cis versus trans, male female, black white, that kind of thing, and then the chain hierarchy, triad, organization, and raw categorical pair were just the ways in which, like the ways in which you combine those social distinctions into actual relationships, social relationships.
I'm just wondering, like, where does Tumblr fit in here? Like, how could he have left out Tumblr as one of the core
Tumblr's
types of social relationships?
Yeah,
Tumblr is just an amoeboid that crosses all of these types of social relationships.
To be fair, anything can become an organization. It seems vaguely designed. It could have both ribosomic and centralized patterns. So Tumblr is an organization.
Where is Shane Kaleli when you need him? Talk about rhizomes. Okay,
Tumblr is a body without organs, but the only organ it's missing is the brain.
Yeah, the body with organs and the body without organs are both organizations.
Yep, they're just different forms of orgs. It's I mean, basically, the only thing I took from that part of Tilly is categorical pairs playing your role in organizations, and everything is probably an organization. Have a nice day. Like,
yeah, I think the actual this kind of nomenclature of spitting out the chain, hierarchy, triad, and then organization, it seems kind of like chain seems pretty fucking non-relevant to social relations, unless you're sending one of those fucking letters you used to get in the post saying if you don't send this on, you'll get 10 years of bad luck.
It's actually not. It's actually not irrelevant because people who are in the middle of a chain tend to occupy a power broker position because they're connecting two different networks. So it's not irrelevant. It comes up all the time in social network analysis.
Think about when we talk about using strikes as logistic choke points, even between equal parts of the economy. That's a weak point in a chain.
But would that not be an organization on one side with a single connecting node and an organization on the other, as opposed to a long chain?
It depends on what level of analysis you're doing. That's the problem with trying to do this stuff as pure. That's why systems analysis and sociology is so complicated. Like, even articulating it, as Kyle is making very clear, is, even articulating it in ways that are mathematically valid is hard, because you're dealing with, when you start looking at just a polity, just like a city, the numbers of different interacting organizations and organizational loops you start dealing with that one person can be a node in is incredible. It builds very, very fast. So what I like about this Tilly Foundation is, unlike a lot of dumb critical theory ways of talking about oppression, it is very rare for a power relationship to be monolithic. Like, you'd have to be in like a very strict hierarchical system for the power relations to be monolithic. And the other insight that we kind of came up to is there's a very hard way to formalize this, but you can kind of approach, the only way you can kind of really approach it would be like basically mapping it onto a statistical model.
Yeah. Okay. I actually worked in some, like, using those social network analysis tools when I worked trying to find fraud networks one time, a long time ago. Fuck me, hated that job. Right. I had to sign the Official Secrets Act for that job. Couldn't fucking believe it. Right. Okay. I've clearance. Do people know that I've got actual clearance in the British system?
Oh, I guess it's not a rumor. Tom is a cop.
Well, yeah. Do you want to know my security clearance level? It's UK caveated and NATO restricted. And I looked it up. Essentially, it's the lowest level of clearance. Because basically, where I grew up, like, my milkman was in the IRA, got caught with fucking bombs and everything. Basically, I'm allowed to see nothing. Like, literally nothing. Yeah. So anyway, they actually gave me, they gave me at the time a USB key so that you could lock a USB kind of a key thing that you could put into your laptop. That would, like, you had to get the password right so that you could log into your computer. And if you got your password wrong 10 times, it would self-destruct. That is not a lie. It would literally explode. The chip inside would detonate if you got it wrong 10 times. Okay. James Bond. Okay, so these are the causal inequality generating mechanisms. Let's discuss these four. So two of them we've discussed, ad nauseum: exploitation and opportunity hoarding in the previous ones. This time he's also adding these two: emulation and adaptation. Who wants to have a go at explaining what emulation or adaptation is? No hands. Let's have a look in the let's have a look here in the book. Okay. Let me get the slide up here from the oh shit, sorry. Let me get the quote up here from the actual text, page 6. So here we go. Let's read this quote. Okay, well, no, I think we're going to hit it in the next couple of slides. Okay, so let's sorry about this. This will be.
I can address this now. I found the quote.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, so it says solution. Okay, so we have problem 3: how to stabilize and reproduce categorical inequalities.
Oh, here,
solution
Kyle,
to problem 3.
Kyle, I have the I have the slides here. Let's just go through them.
Oh,
I have them
okay,
all in here.
okay,
Yeah,
okay.
sorry. It's just I didn't get to check these before we started.
Yeah,
Okay.
so basically we'll get to emulation and adaptation once we get to problem 3.
Okay, do you want to take this slide then instead, Kyle, the explanatory strategy?
Sure. Okay, so Tilly adopts a variety of functional explanation. So that's a sort of type of sociological explanation. He argues that certain kinds of social structural relations are solutions to problems generated within social systems. So they are functional for addressing these problems. The functional explanations allow for struggles and contradictions and extended periods of disruption. So essentially, they are functional, but they are not perfectly so. They tend to interfere with one another and not set in a functional way all the time. He does not believe that functional solutions are spontaneously secreted by social dynamics entirely behind the backs of actors. So they're somewhat consciously derived, not just through blind trial and error. And intentional strategies of collective actors are part of the explanation for how solutions are found and institutionalized. So yeah, the not behind the back, strategizing figures into this. And finally, Tilly poses a problem generated by a set of social relations and then treats the demonstration that a particular social form is a solution to the problem as the core of the explanation of that social form. So, here's problem 1. And then here's a solution to problem 1. And by looking at this solution, we can see how it is functional in addressing problem 1.
So, like, I don't think any of us have any arguments with this setup here. I think this is kind of explains how I think. Anybody?
Yeah, I mean, as E.O. Wright says, Marxist explanations tend to be functionalist explanations.
Yeah, but not hardcore, like just the functionalist, but that, there is, men make their history, but not in their conditions they choose or whatever.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we're all soft functionalist, which as a paradigm can confuse the hell out of other sociologists.
Yes.
Expand on that, Derek.
This is why, like, when a sociologist approaches Marx like a cannibal approaches a baby, they always go up saying, well, Marx is just a conflict theorist, and then, like, that's pretty much it. And that's because, like, Marxism has a pretty highly developed political economic critique, a pretty high a bimodal view of the conflicts in society, but multiple modes of that. I mean, that's why you have modes of production and relations of production, right? And we also still generally believe in human agency, but it's situationally limited by a bunch of external context and by its own ideological framework, which, because you're a soft functionalist, meaning, like, we don't explain everything solely by their functions, but we do think functional explanations are mostly what drives these things. It's actually it actually is a lot of sociologists don't know what to do with us, basically, because when they try to simplify it down to a singular paradigm, they're like, they either go modes of production, stages, theory of history, and then oversimplify the modes, or they go conflict theory. That's what you're really about. Society is driven by conflict, the end. Which both of those are actually not really what, Marx or Engels are actually about, even though we think history is progressed by conflict, et cetera, and so forth. Society is relational. It's like how everyone reads Marx and thinks we're saying that labor is the source of all wealth. And that's also wrong. I mean, explicitly so. So
everybody knows, particularly Tiberius knows that, you know, anime is the true driving force of society. Am I right, Tiberius?
Oh, I'm gonna get you for that.
Okay, Tiberius, why don't you take this slide here? Problem 1.
So the theory is built up through a sequence of 3 nested problems to be solved and their associated solutions. So here we have problem 1, how to secure and enhance rewards from the resources to which one has access. And the solution here being opportunity hoarding and exploitation, which, as Kyle mentioned, we've discussed ad nauseum for the last, I don't know how long this has been a network. So these 2 mechanisms are particularly important in stabilizing and enhancing advantages derived from access to value-generating resources. Tilly accords exploitation a more fundamental role in the over-social production of. Tilly accords exploitation a more fundamental role over the social production of durable inequality because of its centrality in underwriting the power and privileges of the elites. So opportunity hoarding sort of exists as a way to maintain advantages gained through exploitation. However, the exploitation within this framework tends to be more fundamental in generating those opportunities in the first place. But opportunity hoarding complements the exploitation by creating sustainable advantages for various non-elite categories. So those who are not directly within the exploiter class can use the opportunities generated by that class in the perpetuation of exploitation to gain opportunities of access to the value generated by the exploitation, even if they are not within that sort of exploitative class directly.
So
I
like,
would say
middle
don't,
managers in an organization.
right. I
or
would say go ahead.
sorry,
Be
I was
careful
gonna say,
using the
or-
word value anywhere unless it's explicitly Marxist value, because that'll confuse everybody immediately. But
Right.
go ahead.
yes, yeah, but this is what these are direct.
I know they're
from the
direct quotes,
next
and it's also
telling.
Tilly's form of value, not ours. So
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think the main takeaway here for me is that Tilly basically follows the form of classical political economy. It's pretty much what this is saying.
Yeah.
Exploitation is primary, opportunity hoarding is secondary. You have the production of the social surplus and then its distribution among the different classes according to opportunity hoarding. So, yeah, pretty much in the line of classical political economy.
Well, even more so, I mean, like according to Tilly, would it even still fit? Like the idea that you would have strata more than classes using opportunity hoarding to compete. That would be where the opportunity hoarding would be the strongest, actually, because like you're effectively equals without it, right? Like so, like yeah, like me as a pro who has some managerial role but no capital, no, I'm not paid in stocks or anything. I'm going to probably try to opportunity hoard within my firm as an individual or as in a small group more than I would otherwise. This also explains like opportunity hoarding between race, gender categories, ethnic categories, etc. But Tilly's point being with classical political economy and with Marx is all this is still built on top as kind of a it's almost what's interesting about it is like in your daily life experience, the opportunity hoarding would be something you would encounter more, even though it's not the primary driver of your inequality. And I think a lot of the dumb class theories we see right now is emerging by people confusing the secondary form of class competition for the primary form of class competition.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hey, look. Don't look at the capitalist owner. Hey, look. Your manager's an asshole. Manager, boo. Boo, manager.
Yeah, those podcasters are assholes, and they're probably managers somehow. Boo, professionals. Boo.
Boo.
They're
That's
really
where we're at.
sabotaging our otherwise good functioning Keynesian capital market.
Boo.
Licensed professionals are actually capitalists. That's how that works.
Where do anime producers come into this, though, Tiberius? This is the question that we're all here to hear.
They're PMC. They're a PMC.
I don't. Unless you got a trash can on the next slide, I don't think we're talking about anime.
APMC, anime professional managerial class.
The worst.
How did I get stuck with the anime thing? What the hell, Paul?
This is how it's going to go from here on in. Okay.
God damn it.
Okay. Derek, do you want to take
Tom,
this?
you're an opportunity hoarder is all I got to say.
Yeah, fucking what's this opportunity I have? Editing, is that it? Audio editing. Fuck's sake.
You're the host. You're PMC. You're hoarding your opportunity to direct the conversation. This is an outrage.
Fucking the worst opportunity hoarding ever performed. Endless editing.
We must assume that Tom is somehow just a massive masochist, and that's what he's just opportunity hoarding all the pain of cleaning this up.
Opportunity hoarding of social capital and clout, right? As the headliner of the podcast, Tom gets all the benefits of the social capital generated by the podcast itself.
Yeah, fucking hell! I'm the worst opportunity hoarding ever done. It's like kink opportunity. I'm edit kink opportunity hoarding. Okay, Derek, take this problem 2 before I start talking.
The explanatory strategy continue. Problem 2: how to sustain and deepen exploitation and opportunity hoarding. Both of these mechanisms impose harms on others, and both pose a range of problems for would-be exploiters and opportunity hoarders. They face what Tilley calls organizational problems of creating solidarity, trust, interlocking expectation, and reliable forms of enforcement among those with stakes in hoarding and exploitation. Solution: categorical inequity. In absence of these durable categorical distinctions, they face constant difficulty in identifying allies, knowing whom to trust and whom to exclude, to reliably protect their monopolies and enforce subordination. These systems of social closure, exploitation, and control allow parties, even some victims of exploitation, to acquire stakes in these solutions. As a side note, this is what Adolf Reed doesn't shut the fuck up about. Basically, this last point. These systems of social closure, exploitation, and control allow many parties, even those victims of exploitation, to acquire stakes in these solutions. That's what he's always talking about.
White supremacy.
No, he's always talking about black leadership class, because they're actually functionally able to use both capital and white supremacy to maintain a kind of special place within a subcategory of oppressed peoples.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. This is his point. He just pretty much only focuses on the last bit. And also, like, it was a little haunting thinking about how much of our language of social justice literally pulls directly from this idea of durable category distinctions being maintained, like identifying allies, knowing whom to trust and whom to exclude, to reliably protect monopolies and enforce subordination. It's a little creepy.
Yeah, I mean, although these are also problems for the oppressed, right?
Right.
It's just as it says here, like, they can easily turn over into another system of closure.
Right. Well, I'm not saying that social justice is a form of oppression. What I'm saying is, like, when you're in this kind of system and you go to use the tools that already exist in the kind of system instead of change it, your tools replicate the things being done to you a lot of the time. And Tilley's interesting because he basically structurally lays that out, right? Like, I can say that as a offhand remark on Twitter and everyone can call me an asshole, but, like, this does structure. If you're in this kind of system and you're trying to maintain exploitation and opportunity hoarding, the best way to do that is through perpetuating categorical inequities and also occasionally probably releasing them and switching them up when they get too sclerotic. Or
the second order effects come in and kick you in the ass. Then you
need the key point here is solution description, they say they face constant difficulty in identifying allies, knowing whom to trust and whom to exclude. So in coming up with a recognizable category, they can help solve this problem by like lowering the sort of information costs, right? And so because these categories are known everywhere, they can also be taken up as tools by the oppressed, and that can be bad.
Yes, that'll push us on to problem. I thought there was another problem. Okay, we haven't finished here with we haven't finished with problem 2, categorical inequality. Okay, so he distills the core explanation of categorical inequality into 3 propositions. 1, organizationally installed categorical inequality facilitates exploitation. So this is a claim about the effects of categorical inequality and exploitation. The former facilitates the latter. Okay. Yeah. So this is not a case of they were black, so then we exploited them. It's more like, we exploited them. Use of race facilitated the exploitation. Say, for example, bad example, but get what I mean. Organizations whose survival depends on exploitation therefore tend to adopt categorical inequality. So this is a selection argument. The functional trait, categorical inequality, is adopted through an unspecified process because it is functional. And finally, because organizations adopting categorical inequality deliver greater returns to their dominant members, and because a portion of those returns goes to organizational maintenance, such organizations tend to crowd out other types of organizations. So this is in effect a quasi-Darwinian selection explanation that explains why the functional traits generalize so well. Any comments here on that triplicate?
Checks out.
Yeah.
I
really enjoy. I really found the discussion of how he claims these things operate functionally, and even like the kind of Darwinian explanation. I found it very insightful, I must say. I really I thought there was a lot of insight in this chapter, in this book of Tilley's.
Yeah, it's nice to see a kind of Darwinian argument of this sort in, I guess, what is the crossover realm between sociology and economics. It's I guess close to like institutional economics in some ways, but yeah, pretty interesting to see, because there's so much emphasis on physics and that stuff.
Yeah, right. And you were saying before at the beginning of this slide that the sort of like race and exploitation wasn't a good example of this, and I actually think that is wrong. It's kind of like one of the examples of this, like where the Portuguese and then Spanish instituting their empires in the New World, utilizing especially the Portuguese and the generation of the plantation system. That wasn't a strictly racialized thing at first, and it was the sort of like primary category upon which that was sort of justified was like Christian versus non-Christian. But when you started having people who were enslaved in these plantation systems converting into Christianity, they had to sort of like expand that to be not just like Christian versus non-Christian, and because like a lot of the non-Christians were not of the Portuguese or European descent, that they would tend to be more of African or indigenous descent. Therefore, you had a kind of morphing into a racialized category that was much easier to identify and easier to uphold, because you could readily mark somebody as enslaved versus slaver, and it was generally a much quicker and more effective way of categorizing people into an oppressed class for the purpose of exploitation. It's a little bit overly simplified, but I think it's a pretty fair like overview of like the beginnings of the plantation and slave system in the New World.
Yeah, because anybody can lie about what God they believe in, but you can't lie about the color of your skin.
Well, I mean, that is why racial categories emerge from two things. They emerge from that, and then the expulsion of Jews and Muslims from Spain, because that's where the idea of new Christians versus old Christians comes from, and that became immediately racialized. So, like, before that, you do have like vague, nebulous language about like late medieval complaints about black being bad or whatever, but it's not a coherent racial category until it's tied to production or to trying to gather property in primitive accumulation. Because what were they trying to do with the new Christians? They were trying to get their stuff to more strongly establish the Christian state in Spain.
Those damn Spaniards. Okay, problem 3. Type who hasn't had a problem yet? I've
not had a problem.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I have so many problems. You could probably spend the rest of the episode talking about that.
Tiberius, will you tell us more about these problems, will you?
You got like 10 hours to spend because
we know problem 1 for Tiberius, which is it's a nice day out, but Tom has dragged them onto this podcast.
And problem 2, well, we all know is the second primary problem is anime. Okay, Kyle, keep going there.
All right. Problem 3, how to stabilize and reproduce categorical inequalities. While categorical inequalities may facilitate exploitation and opportunity hoarding, they also pose new challenges to organizations since they potentially constitute the bases for solidarities and networks opposed to the dominant categories. While they reduce the transaction costs for sustaining exploitation and opportunity hoarding, they also potentially reduce transaction costs for collective struggles by subordinates. Categorical inequality sets in motion a pattern of contradictory effects. There we go. So solution to problem 3, emulation and adaptation. To the extent that categorical inequality is diffused throughout society, emulation, so that it appears ubiquitous and inevitable, people living within these categories elaborate daily routines, adaptation, that enable them to adapt to the conditions they face. The categorical inequalities themselves will be stabilized. Emulation and adaptation lock distinctions into place, making them habitual and sometimes even essential to exploiters and exploited alike. The result is both exploited and excluded groups are less likely to form the kinds of oppositional solidarities that pose a serious threat. So we have emulation, which is the diffusion of categorical inequality throughout society. And then we have elaboration of daily routines that allow people to adapt to the conditions of categorical inequality, which is adaptation. And because adaptation is like a continuous and repetitive process, it locks the distinctions into place, making them habitual. So therefore you get, ideology, quote unquote, sometimes even essential to the exploiters and exploited alike. So for instance, the classic problem in Marxism of like, well, we don't really want to create working class supremacy as our object, but one way to motivate the working class is to build up working class identity. So how then does that identity dissolve itself? That sort of question of is a product of adaptation.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the stuff that keeps left communist up at night.
Right.
I mean, similarly with race, like you think about ways to adapt and reduce racial tensions. Most of them actually need racial solidarity to work, and so the adaptation actually also reifies the category. Even if it's even if it's an anti-racist adaptation, it still reifies the category. And this is where I think Marxists have to really think about how to approach this stuff, because you end up with a lot of like things that make no sense. Like, if we racialize everything, eventually nothing will be racialized, maybe. And you might think, well, that's ridiculous. That's our argument for proletarianization. If we proletarianize everything, then proletariat will go away.
Yeah, and
Well,
you know,
I think,
we
I think that the difference is that, like, if you racialize everything, is the same as like proletarianizing everything, because like the proletarianizing everything is like bringing everything into the same category, whereas like racializing everything tends to more reify distinctions between categories.
But there's no way to proletarianize everything. Like, that's the kind of that's actually what. I don't mean to throw endnotes number 4 at you, because we're not talking about it right now, but like, that's literally what they're dealing with, and also the analytical Marxists started dealing with the Adam Perozorsky work. I think I said that right. Probably didn't. Where you keep on pushing for a collective actor, and with proletarianization to work against the bourgeoisie, but you have a threshold on it, and then by the time that you do start achieving universal proletarianization, everything falls within the category. What happens is all this opportunity hoarding looks like bigger and bigger distinctions. That's actually what they don't use these terminologies because they write in obnoxious critical theory speak, but this is exactly what they're saying. Is like, if 95% of the people are wage earners, and they also contribute in some way to productive value, which even managers do, then all these distinctions and all these opportunity cul-de-sacs start seeming more and more important to people, because they can't see the primary contradiction at all. And I didn't realize it, but that is describing an emulation and an adaptation problem. It really is.
Yeah, like when it becomes you so immersed in it that you can't see the actual relation, the key relation, you're kind of fucked. That's but yeah. This was the first this line here, like the talk about like the reduction in the transaction cost actually allows the people who are exploited, say, to see their own like kind of category themselves, and reduces their cost to organization. This was like the one of the few bits so far I've read in the book that it's nearly talking towards a kind of revolutionary kind of horizon. Something that I think that's largely lacking in the book so far. But then he goes on here on the solution to totally kick that in the nuts and destroy it.
Yeah, I mean, it's contradictory, but it also tends to temporarily stabilize itself. And then I guess the other thing I was thinking about, in terms of sort of Marx's argument is like, well, the proletarians are sort of defined by the fact that they must work to live. They don't possess anything in themselves. But I guess, yeah, in a universal situation of proletarianization, opportunity hoarding begins to look like possessions.
Yeah.
Right?
It really does.
Yeah.
Like getting your kids in a better school so they can get a better work position. I mean, like, just think about it. It really does look like possessions. And then you can confuse it with non-productive property, like, I don't know, having a deed on a house that you can't, that doesn't have productive land tied to it or whatever. Then it can be a really consciousness distorting, to use Marxist phraseology, kind of situation. To speak to Tom for a second, Tom, I think you're right. I think some of this is more E.O. Wright than Tilly. E.O. Wright seems categorically allergic to ever having to admit that maybe you can't just reform your way out of anything. Like that's, call that analytic Marxism disease or something. But that, like, they all seem to be like, well, revolution's impossible. Bye. So
yeah. Like it's a very historically situated thing, isn't it? Revolution is impossible. They have never existed in world history. History is static. Okay, come into my analytical Marxist class. Right, let's move on. The explanatory condition or strategy continued. So here we're coming on to the man with probably the greatest name in the world ever, Stinchcombe. I think that's like where did they get this guy? Fucking hell. Stinchcombe's functional explanation. Okay, so
it was functionally necessary for him to be called Stinchcombe.
what was the function of it then? Come on, explain
to amuse you, Tom. To amuse you.
That's definitely has been his primary function. Okay, so we got 3 boxes here where he's going to basically kind of put together this general idea he's been developing so far. So you have this like systemic tension, then you have a problem in need of a solution, and then you have a functionally explained solution to a problem, and they keep on reacting back. So like your functional explanation to say a problem that's caused by like a tension or a contradiction in the system, that solution like can act back onto the problem and create a second order effect, and then you can functionally solve that one, and so on and so on. You get into this kind of like loop of functional problems, solutions to problems. The problem itself is generated by a causal process referred to by Stinchcombe as a tension in the system. Like I kind of think this like a kind of contradiction or whatever. Through some kind of selection mechanism, the black box of functional explanations, the problem stimulates the production of a solution, which in turn dampens the problem. This reminded me a bit, Kyle, I must say, of the kind of cybernetic feedback mechanisms.
Yeah, he's just describing feedback. The way that he's just describing the way that feedback regulates a system. So I mean, that's what it is.
Yeah, it does feel like. It feels like, I know Esri would be here expounding on this point if I wasn't, but it feels like something like dialectics leading to systems theory, like is what you're seeing here. And maybe that's us being Marxist reading it back in there, but that also seems to be what I'm looking at. Like there's a systemic contradiction. It needs to be fixed. We have an explanation, but it goes back on itself, and we didn't have a feedback loop. Like,
yeah, the thing is that you just you need to add on the point that the produced solution also produces another tension, and then you've got it, right?
Right. But so that's Hegel's infinite dialectical recursion, though, like, because every Aufhebung generates another dialectical contradiction, in which that's how history moves forward. And I'm only bringing this up because I actually kind of hate the fact we talk in weird Hegelese, because it's confusing to every normie out there in the world. But like this is modeling pretty. It's not the same, but it's pretty close to what Hegel and Marx were getting at. Marx wanted to just remove all the God stuff from this crap. So
yeah. I think the thing is, you just need to have that progression forward to another problem, because like what you could be describing here is just like a really simple, like, oh, it's a thermostat, it's regulating the internal temperature of the house,
Yeah, I think you feel like my problem with this one is here that the functional solutions and the kind of problems that come from attention, they are just like never seem to react onto the original systemic tension. Like that's the problem with this functional diagram, that like you can have these mini problems that kind of develop off the systemic tension, and they can squirrel off in a big loop somewhere, but sometimes that squirreling off with these other solutions can be large enough to act back and hit that systemic tension and reorganize stuff. And that's the process that you see that one arrow coming from systemic tension over to problem in the solution box. There's no reaction back to there. Which
but I think this is kind of like just taking like Aristotle's prime mover as like oh, we just need something to get this system going. That's really all the tension is doing here. Because if you look at the next diagram, it's clear that like the tension is carried forward through the chain.
Take this one, Kyle. Yeah.
Okay, so the Tilley's model is like an elaboration of Stinchcombe here. Tilley's model of durable inequality consists of a series of interlocking functional explanations of this type. So initially we have the tension, which is like the prime mover, scarcity of and competition over important economic resources. So this creates a positive charge, and then we have a problem, insecurity of control over important economic resources, which is implied by the tension. So that feeds forward to a functional solution, or in other words, a new tension, which resolves the previous problem, but at the cost of producing a tension that feeds forward into the next one. So this is Hegel's dialectic, right?
What's missing here is that like these actual secondary order effects can come back and actually loop back onto prior tensions and destroy that original one. Like that. So say, for example, we have a revolution.
Potentially.
Like you have all these like problems of exploitation, blah, blah, blah. And then you have a revolutionary moment. And that goes back to try and get rid of scarce competition over economic resources. There's that final loop. It's very telling in this book, that ability for that loop back to the square, the first square, the first tension, original tension is never given.
Yeah, this one feeds forward infinitely, and it doesn't feed back from the end to the beginning.
Yeah, it's Bernsteinism in a chart.
Yes.
Boo, boo Bernstein. Kind of like boo anime as well, Tiberius, before you get going. Okay.
What?
But I do really like the.
I know what's going on here. Tension.
Problem.
Tom needs to pick on someone about anime. Problem, Sophie is not here. Functional solution, Tiberius is here and a likely candidate to be picked on.
Problem, Tiberius doesn't like anime.
Functional solution, new tension. Ignore Tiberius's actual preference.
Exactly. And so on, infinite regress, but never coming back to the original tension. Never, ever returning. That's why I like this graph so much. No, I do like the graph, though. I do like this understanding. I do think this is partially. I think, like, Tilley explains kind of core things that we see here. Now, I think the revolutionary element is essentially excised from this. That's my main problem with this stuff, but I think that I really like this kind of functional explanation for sociological problems.
Yeah, when I put this on a revolutionary on our modal model, it literally starts to spiral in my head, because I start seeing like this little graph, and then you hit emulation and adaptation, then rupture, new tension, turn back, go through it again, turn back, go through it again, and it just starts doing this. It's kind of fun.
Yes.
Hegel's spiral ever upwards into a more perfect world.
Or
a more tense world.
A more tense, shitty world.
Yeah, a more German world. Let's be honest.
Boo!
Boo. Oh, no.
Germans and Italians, the only two... Actually, no, wait. Germans, Italians, and the English. Wait, no. Germans, Italians, the English, and the French. They're the people that you can be racist against. Basically Western Europe.
Which, by
You're
the
in the
way,
spiral now, Tiberius.
Yeah. I was about to say, isn't that like Engels' list of world historic peoples?
Yeah, basically.
You're allowed to hate the imperialists. Americans too. Fucking hell, I can't believe you left out Americans. Fuck you, Tiberius. Right. Now.
Well, that's because the Americans don't exist. They're a nebulous empire.
That's true. An error if ever there was one. Now, Tiberius, do you want to take this, the underlying Marxist logic of Tilly?
All right, so Tilly's underlying Marxist logic. So Marxism being the theoretical tradition in social science that comes closest to this general framework, but Tilly makes almost no reference to Marxist theory in his book, which, kind of I thought was kind of an interesting point. Derek, I haven't actually gone and read the Tilly book, so I'm only going off of what Yo right here has. And you kind of have to wonder whether or not Tilly actually read and incorporated Marx, or just sort of stumbled into the same thing just kind of by happenstance. It kind of an interesting thing to think about, but I don't know how useful that is actually.
Bourgeois scientist reads Marx, claims he never read Marx, comes up with theory kind of based on Marx, and it gets a name for himself.
Keynes. Excuse me.
No. Keynes.
No. Keynes is anti.
Boo, Keynes.
Boo, Keynes. Boo under consumptionism. Boo under consumptionism, Keynes and another fucking guys.
Yeah, so instead of viewing Tilly's work as a fusion of Marx and Weber, it is more appropriate to see Tilly as imposing some Weberian ideas and insights into the Marxist tradition, and it enriches an essentially Marxist form of class analysis by extending that analysis to include forms of categorical inequality that are not systematically discussed by Marx, which I think is a fair point. I mean, that's basically the entire point of the book, is to start from a Marxist foundation and then attempt to include a more nuanced and complicated, I guess, sense of class in order to better explain the class dynamics of capitalism. I think we'll get it once we start getting into the back half of this book. I think we'll have some issues going forward.
We will.
Yeah.
This part of the book I remember liking once I got through all the charts and figured out what the hell it was actually saying. My thing, Tom, is I actually think if you were back engineering Weber, you could accidentally get to Marx because Weber is, mucking around with Marx explicitly because he's, an SPD guy. Whereas Charles Tillich is probably being all Harvard-y, probably has read some Marx, but given his wording, he may just literally have just been like, well, let's apply systems theory to Weber and see what happens. And lo and behold, you re-Marxify it.
Yeah, I don't know. I find it hard if you're some Harvard lecturer that you couldn't have done a couple of slides on Marxist sociological theory.
Oh yeah, that's totally true. I mean, he's got to know some of it, but
you just you excise the language. It's an age-old trick, isn't it?
Well, I mean,
you change the terms.
I mean, well, even the other thing is Marxists did that in America for 50 years. That's why the Frankfurt School, whenever it originally said critical theory, it meant Marxism. Christopher Lasch, when he would mention dialectics, he means Marxism, because they were all afraid of getting Red scared out of the university. So they would speak in code.
Yeah, well, this seems to kind of sit fairly neatly with that kind of tension. That you can understand that. What year was Tilly's written in, though? Was Tilly's stuff not written in the 70s or 80s? Charles Tilly, Durable Inequality. Let's look it up.
Tilly, 70s through 90s. So Durable Inequality.
Let's have a look here.
I can't find that book, but like War and History, Kirshen, his stuff on sociologies of war. That's the 80s and
1998.
90s. Oh yeah,
1998.
so yeah, that you can be an open Marxist by that point, so that can't be the reason.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So the underlying Marxist logic, reasons why Tilley's approach is so close to the Marxist tradition. Number one, exploitation is at the centerpiece of Marxist theory of class as it is for Tilley. Number two, forms of categorical inequality emerge and are sustained in Tilley's analysis, above all, because of the ways they help stabilize exploitation, and secondarily, because of the ways they facilitate opportunity hoarding. Marx certainly believed that class categories emerge for this reason. They make possible a stable reproduction of exploitation to a far greater extent than if the exploitation existed simply on the basis of fluid relations between individuals. And three, Tilley treats the relevance of culture and beliefs for inequality almost entirely in terms of the ways that they help reproduce categorical inequality, but not as autonomous, powerful causal forces in their own right. This is much closer to Marx's materialism, specifically his functionalist theory of the relationship between the economic base and the ideological structure, than Weber's view of the relationship between culture and social structure. So this is like, what? Yeah.
No, point three is how it's different from classical intersectional theory, because intersectional theory sees all the various inputs as causally equal, because they approach it from a standpoint of legality. Originally, although that gets actually epistemologized through standpoint epistemology later, whereas Tilley does what I used to try to argue for, which was like what I tried to call materialist intersectionality, which is like assume that class relations or assume that relations that reproduce social life are primary, and then map on top of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because like he frames exploitation as the key motor of the system, but doesn't necessarily say that exploitation is exclusive to the relationship between capitalist and worker.
No,
it's more general theory than that.
Which is interesting though, because unlike say when we talk about Marxist social relations, you could have this without having in almost any mode, right? So like when we articulate this stuff, we have to be modally limited to, like, we're talking about capitalism. That's not how feudalism works. That's not how the weird shit between feudalism and capitalism works. It's only capitalism that has this particular bimodal distribution. Somebody like this who's actually, pulls it in a different direction is like Peter Turchin, who does this between elites.
Right.
But so he can map it on in history. What is interesting though is exploitation here is the primary driver. And I guess we would say that's unique to capitalism. I don't know that Tilley would, right? Because like in Marxist stuff, other modes of social life are not as driven by exploitation. They're driven by like outright, accumulation, or by domination, or by oppression, etc.
He has a different definition of exploitation.
Is it the Romer one?
Maybe it could be. I mean, he's basically just saying that exploitation is whenever you in some way force someone to produce something for you that they don't get themselves, right?
Right.
So it would apply across historical categories, although it would have very different forms.
Right. Oh man, this is why Marxists trying to talk to anyone else is difficult, because we don't define our terms the same as they do.
Yeah. So anyway, I could see how this could map to a sort of modal historical explanation, but yeah, the terminology is different.
Kyle, do you want to take the next couple of Marxist logics here?
Sure. So the reasons why Tilley's approach is so close to the Marxist tradition. Number 4. I feel like I'm doing like a YouTube video.
It's
5 reasons why Tilley's approach is so close to the Marxist tradition.
Yeah, I mean, we're on
like
YouTube
and
right
subscribe.
now. So...
Yeah, why Tilley's approach totally sucks.
You'll never believe what Tilley has to say. Okay.
In the name of like, share, subscribe. Amen.
Marxism can't be combined with other logics of oppression unless... Yeah. Okay. Anyway, functional explanations play a central role in classical historical materialism. They play at most a marginal role in Weber's social theory. In Marxism, class relations are functionally explained by the level of development of the forces of production, and superstructures are functionally explained by the necessary conditions for stabilizing and reproducing class relations. Point 5. In classical historical materialism, class relations endure and remain stable so long as the forces of production continue to develop, becoming vulnerable once the forces of production are fettered. The rationale for this claim is that the costs of sustaining class relations rise when the forces of production stagnate. Tilley argues the central condition for the erosion of systems of categorical inequality is rising transaction costs for maintaining existing relations and the lowered costs of an alternative. Weber has nothing remotely like this in his account of social change and inequality.
I really like that number 5. You know, I think that's how I understand like the contradictions of capitalism. You know, they're like, if Marx is correct in his understanding of the key core central contradictions in capitalism, like that the operating costs essentially to the system are higher, they're going to be the fetters, and if something new comes through, it's going with less fettered, less costs associated with it, it will dominate. And you know, I think this is a very kind of nice way to understand that idea of the fetters as a function of transaction costs.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting relative to, say, McNair's theory of political succession between modes of production, because in this case, it's sort of a lot easier to imagine something like the British aristocracy becoming capitalists at the same time as being landlords, because that's a lower transaction cost system to buy into.
Right. This gets Marxist out of a lot of typology problems, honestly, and it explains a lot of what we actually see. What I think is interesting about this, it also explains divisions within capitalism itself, because we keep on seeing like the political superstructure, are like, you know, the political economy around capitalism. Once we hit probability crisis, it changes. I mean, you go from, you know, classical liberal entrepreneur, state just sets up the market and lets it go, to proto-Keynesianism, to pure Keynesianism, post-war in America, post-war social compact. I think that's true for pretty much everywhere that we would be from. Into crisis of profitability in the 70s. Neoliberalism lowers transaction costs for a little while, but the feathers reaccumulate, etc. So it both explains things between these large historical epochs and within them, how they change in and of themselves.
Yeah, I think that's fundamentally correct. Yeah. So basically, Tiller is better than Weber. That's what we're saying? Vapor boo, tilly, okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Ironically, the person who doesn't claim to be a Marxist and has no relationship to the social democratic tradition is more of a Marxist.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not remarkably, though. Not remarkably. The vast majority of people who claim to be Marxists have non-Marxist kind of politics when it comes down to it, if you ask me.
Most of them are
because they're all
Lassalleans
dirty
are worse.
revisionists, and we have the correct and true line.
That is true. That is true. Yeah.
Never mind if we don't agree with each other on everything, but in so much that we do, we are correct.
Yeah. I forgive Tiberius for the anime because he made a good point. Okay. Yeah. Now, the last one of these. Derek, do you want to take this last one?
Tilly's arguments are not merely recapitulations of Marxist themes in new language. Take that, Tom. His attempt to subsume gender, race, nationality, and every other form of inequality under a unitary conceptual framework goes well beyond Marx's ? Term. I would also, just as a side note, I'd also say it may go well beyond Marx because Marx doesn't write about most of those things. It doesn't go beyond Engels. Engels did write about a lot of that. His differentiation of opportunity hoarding from exploitation is generally absent from most varieties of Marxist class analysis. That's pretty true. His elaboration and emulation of adaptation as mechanisms for stabilizing categorical inequity introduces concepts that are not explicitly present in Marxist discussions of similar themes. I'd have to read the entire mega for that, but I think in the main text is true.
Yeah, but he says Marxist discussions. He doesn't say Marxist.
Oh, yeah. Marxist discussions? No, there's other ways of doing it. Would you... the subsuming gender, race, nationality. I think nationality and gender were things that Marx and Engels actually really did talk about. Race, they kind of avoid.
I don't think they avoid. I don't know. It's not.
They have an anti-racist stance, but some of them when they apply like stuff like geographic materialism, which they were both into, they can get a little weird.
Yeah, I think that they may have a bit more. E.O. Wright may have a bit more of a point here regarding a thing that he said earlier, which is that Marx didn't systematically address these questions to the same degree as he addressed, political economy. So I think that may be accurate because there's definitely anti-racist stance. There's a critique of gender repression. There's a whole bunch of engagement with the national question. But I'm not sure that those subjects are addressed systematically, although I guess Engels does attempt that with gender, right?
But the origins of the family is gender.
Yeah, but
yeah.
If you look at it, it's like he attempts to subsume all of these different things, all these types of inequality under a unitary conceptual framework. Like, I don't know, like the forces and relations of production not include all of those things, and materialism. Like, is that not a unitary framework that explains all of them? The fact that they didn't explicitly go into, say, some of these, as much as others, doesn't mean that they're not combined under a unitary conceptual framework. I just think that's a real stretch.
I would say that saying that nationality but Marx doesn't deal with nationality under the production things, except that states exist, but he doesn't define states that way. He defines nationality for Marx is defined by long-standing ethnic differences that develop over time, which he actually, in the few letters we have about it, he explains geographically, which is still, I guess, still in his broad materialism. So he sees it as more of an outpouring of the way people adapt to their environment more than production itself. It's even more primary, maybe even.
Yeah, it's kind of like the climatic theory of nation, right? German people think a lot because they're in cold places. They have to stay inside. That's a thing I heard a lot in Japan.
How
Yeah.
does that explain the Polish? I know.
Tom.
Actually, you know what? I have one more thing to say about this is that in his mid-series feedback episode, Mike Duncan went in for the climatic theory. I don't know why, but he was like, I think there's something to this. I'd like to look into it more.
Jared Diamond believes in the climatic theory of national development.
I think it's a pretty lit. Like I think there are probably stuff around the types of what the core commodity or food was. Like I think there's some truth to that. But like when the difference between Germany and Poland, it's just a load of rubbish. I think they're, or like the difference between Ireland and England, like Jesus, like
what's that? That you guys have better liquor? I don't know. Like
yeah, I don't know. I think it's
whiskey versus gin.
I'm highly skeptical, but I wasn't trying to insult Polish people because I like Polish people. I spent a lot of time in Poland. I like Poland. Don't let people think I'm being anti-Polish here. Okay.
Well, and I think that there is a difference between just to say that these various like categories of like identity or race, gender, that kind of stuff are subsumed into the framework of exploitation under whatever system in specific capitalism, and to give a systematic explanation of how and why, particularly with the emulation and adaptation. I think it's broadly true that there hasn't really been a whole lot of explicitly Marxist theory going into that kind of explanation of the ways in which these categories are reified and uphold the systems of exploitation.
Well, I would say there probably has been, but this is where I guess that we still can agree with AO, right? They're not linked in this way. So, like when you read, for example, Noah Ignavyev's Race Trader, when he talks about race relations to capital and all that, it's systematically worked out, and it actually comes to very similar conclusions, but it's less formalized. It's more anecdotal about how these things work, and so. It's not, I don't think it's completely fair to say that Marxists didn't deal with this or didn't even like try to systematize it. What we didn't do is we didn't have a language of systems theory to express it. So we couldn't generalize about it as much. So we kind of saw them as co-emergent but distinct systems. And this actually would indicate that they're not.
Right. Yeah. So various Marxists would say, oh, let's look at race in the context of the system of exploitation under capitalism, but yeah, there was no generalizations of the patterns and systems in which race was integrated into capitalism that could be explanatory for other types of categorical exploitation.
Yeah. What I find interesting about this, if Marx had stated this all extremely clearly in this way, man, we'd have been easier to call like late Stalinist Soviet Union out on certain things. Like,
yeah, definitely.
If only Marx had lived another 100 years to accomplish another 20% of what he had attempted to accomplish.
Right. I mean, I always go back to Hal Draper. There was Capital was supposed to be 5 volumes. 2 of which were on like nations and the development of nations from political economy, and we never got anywhere near that.
Maybe Marx, could have been given cryogenic freezing until such a point where ADHD meds became available and he could actually write at a steady pace.
ADHD meds and topical antibiotics would have helped him quite a bit.
That's right, both, yes.
We'll clear up those boils on his ass. Let's get it straight. That would have helped a lot. You know, the other thing as well, what we're all wanting to know is what would Marx think about cancel culture? That's the thing that I want to know about.
I hate you right now.
I was going to say, or if the Soviets hadn't decided that Marxism was functionally illegal in the Soviet Union, that would be nice too.
Yeah. Although they did print a lot of Marx. It's crazy. Like, they printed loads of Marx books. People just mustn't have read any of them. They just had to have them on their shelves.
Well, if you took it too seriously and were an outspoken Marxist too much, then you would get purged.
Well, I mean, to be fair, that's only really true in the 30s.
Yeah, in the Stalin, it's 30s, 40s, yeah.
Yeah, like by the 50s and 60s, you could be a good Marxist and you wouldn't get purged. Just no one would hear anything you said. They put you in like an obscure university and like Vladivostok, and you just freeze, but you'd still be alive and could do work. And we might find about your stuff later after the Soviet thaw, but
Vladivostok is such a cool place. I'd love to go visit Vladivostok. Seriously. In my childhood, Vladivostok was like Timbuktu and Vladivostok. There were these like places that weren't really real.
So yeah, I almost took a boat to Vladivostok from Korea, but
Korea, that's a long way. That's a 1,000-mile boat journey at least, is it?
Yeah, but I mean, it's how close is Vladivostok to anything? Like,
it's closer to Japan. I thought you were going to say Japan. I would have thought it's not that far from northern Japan.
I didn't live in Japan. I lived in Korea.
Yeah, well, what are you doing, Derek? I think we'll leave it at this point. It's kind of a logical place to leave it, and we're nearly up to 2 hours. So I don't have it in me to do in a whole other hour. So we'll do this short one this week. Any final stuff on this underlying Marxist stuff before this underlying Marxist logic before we wrap up? Or are we all Marxist logic?
I mean, we're gonna get into a lot of the issues with Tilly's argument probably the next session. So I think we can leave it for then to talk about that stuff.
Cool. Okay, so let's go to the chat and see. Let's say thanks to everybody for coming in the chat. So we have Aiden, John Watson, Shot, Pedro Alvarez, Tilly gets owned, not clickbait. I like that one. Grimlock, D. Bruce with his Georgism in there every time. Default CPI, Mark Boland. Who else do we have? Clearly, we need to launch Varn Coin. What do you make of that one, Derek? Fugot.
So would I get paid in it? Because I don't know that would work. But
yeah, I'm not sure how it would work. I haven't actually been following the Dogecoin one. I actually didn't know it was like a purely a piss take meme coin. That's pretty impressive.
It's been around for like 5 years.
Has it?
Yeah,
quite a long time.
Fucking hell, that is pathetic. Oswald,
wait, did you say DJ CPI?
Yes, I think so. Why?
Because DJ CPI is actually a really cool artist from up in Canada. She does some amazing mixtapes.
No, Default CPI.
Oh, okay.
So maybe it's probably not the same person then.
Our brief moment in the limelight.
Yeah. E minor, Oswald Spengler, always in the chat. Oswald, Choice Fantastic, Patreon, Grimlock. Okay, that's the whole lot. Thanks everybody for coming, and we'll go offline and sure we'll chat to you all. I don't know, are we doing next week as well to make up for the last one, or are we going on a 2 week from now? It might be next week. I'll let people know anyway.
We'll figure it out.
We'll figure it out. Yeah. Okay. End broadcast. Bye.